I can't be with someone who resorts to violence. I'm going to hand you over to the police. My husband, who is covered in wounds, said to me, as I regained consciousness in the hospital. There was a woman who was weeping beside him. I clenched my fists and looked down. My name is Raya, and I'm 32 years old. I've been married to my husband, Elliot, for 6 years. Although things have calmed down a bit from the lovey-dovey days when we were first married. Our relationship isn't bad at all, and I am happy with my life. Even after 6 years, we still don't have any children. I'd be lying if I say that I am not concerned about that at all. Of course, there is a reason why we haven't had children even after 6 years of marriage. It's so-called infertility. However, there was no clear cause for either Elliot or me, and strangely enough, the test results alone showed no abnormality in either of us. Nevertheless, the state of being unable to have children is called unexplained infertility in medical terms. My husband and I were in exactly this situation. There are two things that couples with this unexplained infertility can do. One is to wait for natural conception patiently, and the other is to undergo more comprehensive tests to thoroughly investigate the cause. When we first found out about the infertility, driven by the strong desire for a child, we underwent various tests. However, the results remained unclear, and the cause was never definitively identified. At one point, the doctor suggested IVF and other methods, but by then, Elliot and I were both tired of trying to identify the cause of infertility, and gradually, we started thinking that, if we couldn't have children, we'd accept it and decided to spend our time together, just the two of us. Of course, the possibility of natural conception wasn't completely ruled out, and we haven't completely given up. However, we agreed that there was no need to forcefully pursue having a child. While Elliot is at work, there are times when I feel lonely since I don't work and stay home all day to take care of the housework. I often think about how nice it would be to have a child during times like these, but waiting for Elliot to come back from work every day while doing the housework, and spending time together talking about trivial things, are fulfilling in its own way, though nothing particularly unusual happens, and that is not interesting. Lately, I have genuinely started thinking that it would be nice if Elliot and I could continue this kind of life, just the two of us, for decades to come. So, even if we couldn't have children, it wouldn't be a problem. I truly believed that Elliot probably felt the same way. However, it seemed my thoughts were self-centered. On our 5th wedding anniversary, Elliot suddenly said this. "Raya, I'm sorry, but I want a divorce." "Huh? Why all of a sudden?" Taken aback by his abrupt statement, I unconsciously asked. "Well, it's not that I've come to dislike you, Raya. In fact, I still like you, and I'm truly grateful for that. You handle all the household chores diligently every day. That's really how I feel." But what? What's the matter?" Elliot hesitated to continue, so I questioned him before he finished his sentence. Then Elliot said something unexpected. "I want a child." I felt everything I had built up until now collapsed with a loud crash. He said that he was still unhappy about not having children, even though he's been married for 6 years. He also said that there was no medical reason for our infertility, so it's likely that the compatibility of our bodies might not be ideal. It's a harsh way to put it, and I felt deeply disheartened, but essentially, Elliot was implying that if the partner changes, there's a possibility of having a child. Certainly, from the standpoint of wanting to have children, Elliot had a point. However, somehow the reason for wanting a divorce stuck with me, because in all the years I've lived with him, I've never seen him desire a child so desperately. I had been the more enthusiastic one about infertility treatments and finding the cause. Elliot, on the other hand, had always seemed indifferent to the matter. Therefore, I want a divorce because we can't have children. Was a reason that I could never agree with. The rationale behind it seemed so vague to me, so I said, "You say something like that after all these years, then you must have some other reasons." "No, I don't. There's no other reason." He insisted that the only reason was not being able to have a child. Since it seemed like an excuse he had made up, I couldn't bring myself to agree to a divorce, and didn't comply. Honestly, even if we couldn't have children, I wanted to be with Elliot forever. Maybe I was being stubborn, because I had this feeling that I was being betrayed. I can't deny that. But more than that, I simply couldn't accept Elliot's overly obscure reason for divorce. Even though there were no drastic measures like a trial involved, I guess Elliot had already factored in that kind of reaction from me. Since that day, he began repeatedly urging me to agree to a divorce. As such, life continued for what must have been several months. Our relationship became sour, and it had fallen into a state where I couldn't say that our relationship was as good as it used to be. Even with that deteriorated relationship, I refused to agree to a divorce, somewhat out of stubbornness, and stayed married with Elliot. However, I was growing weary of this kind of life, and it was clear that we couldn't continue this relationship indefinitely. Elliot seemed to want to break free from this situation by all means. One day, Elliot initiated a conversation. "Raya, why don't we talk things over again, while we have dinner together?" Dinner, huh? Indeed, we hadn't had meals together much lately. The last time we had a meal together was months ago. We can't keep living with our relationship like this forever, right? Certainly, what Elliot said was right, and we couldn't leave this relationship as is. Thinking that, I accepted Elliot's suggestion and decided to share a meal with him for the first time in a while. I told him that I didn't feel like cooking. Then, Elliot got takeout from a local shop and prepared the meal for us. When we sat down, Elliot said with excitement, "Before we talk, how about having a few drinks?" I was surprised by his words, because I can't drink alcohol at all. Just a sip of alcohol makes me drunk instantly. When I got carried away and drank strong alcohol with Elliot in the past, I got terribly drunk with just a sip and ended up passing out. Elliot should know this, so I wondered why he would suggest that we drink. Perhaps he said it as a joke to lighten the mood. "Sorry, but you know that I can't drink, right?" Easily refused, Elliot seemed slightly disappointed, but he laughed and said, Sorry, you're right." That was the end of the conversation about alcohol. In that awkward atmosphere, we started having our meal. In between, Elliot would talk to me about random things. I responded in a nonchalant manner, and Elliot responded in a way that was neither negative nor positive. This awkward interaction seemed to symbolize our relationship, which went cold. Why was I still not agreeing to a divorce even in this situation? The atmosphere was so bad to the point that it was funny. Without turning to Elliot, I kept myself busy with my phone. Elliot didn't care about that, and he talked to me again about the divorce, but I wasn't really listening and I just made agreeable responses here and there. He must have known that I was only half listening. Nonetheless, Elliot continued speaking as if he didn't mind. Amidst this uncomfortable atmosphere, as the meal progressed, I started to feel something odd within my body. Even though I hadn't consumed any alcohol, I felt somewhat drunk. Gradually, I found it hard to even give nods of agreement, and my consciousness was drifting further away. In the end, I couldn't even remain seated, and I fell forward onto the table. Right before losing consciousness, I saw Elliot start saying something. Just before passing out, I heard Elliot's words. "With this, it's finally over." And then, I lost consciousness. I didn't know how much time had passed since then. When I woke up, I was on a hospital bed, and by my side was Elliot, covered in wounds all over his body. From what I could see, there didn't seem to be any major injuries like fractures, but there were countless bruises and cuts visible in various parts of his body, and it looked as if he had been attacked by someone. I was surprised to see Elliot like that and looked around while I was still feeling foggy. My eyes met those of my parents, who were looking at me with concern. While they were relieved that I had regained consciousness, they had somewhat complex expression. And besides Elliot and my parents, there were two more people in the hospital room. One was a male colleague of Elliot's, whom I had met a few times in the past, and the other was a woman who was crying profusely by my husband's side. Because I couldn't instantly comprehend the situation that I just saw, I asked Elliot so that I could understand. What happened? How did you get injured like that? And who are these people? I had so many questions to ask him that I got into a questioning mood. Calm down, I'll explain everything from the beginning. Saying that, Elliot began to talk. First of all, the root of all this is you drinking alcohol. Do you remember? As I shook my head, Elliot let out an exaggerated sigh. During the meal, I remember feeling drunk-like sensations, but I didn't drink alcohol. However, no, you suddenly started drinking alcohol. Perhaps you didn't like what I was saying and got drunk and started causing a scene. You punched me, started throwing things everywhere, and you were out of control. I couldn't hide my astonishment. There was no way something like that could have happened, I thought. According to Elliot, he called on a colleague and this woman, because he realized that even as a man, he wouldn't be able to restrain me, who was uncontrollable due to drunkenness, and the situation was getting out of hand. I learned that this woman was an acquaintance of Elliot's, and he thought it might be helpful to have a woman, when trying to hold me down since I am a woman as well. However, by the time this woman arrived at our house, I had already collapsed from being intoxicated. And I was lying unconscious, he explained. Perhaps due to my unruly behavior while drunk, my intoxication worsened. When I collapsed, I hit my head on the floor and became immobile. His colleague, who arrived later, also understood the situation upon arrival, called an ambulance and brought me to the hospital, because he was worried about me who was unconscious and Elliot who was covered in wounds. Both of them stayed here to explain the situation to me. For some reason, Elliot mumbled and gave no clear explanation as to why the woman was crying so hard. He simply asked that I leave her alone and not ask any more questions. Though feeling unsatisfied somehow, I couldn't say anything in response. After all, I had no memory whatsoever, so I didn't know what to say. I closed my eyes and groaned as I was trying to trace my memory, but I couldn't remember anything. Looking at me like that, Elliot said, I'm sorry, but I can't stay married to you any longer. Please accept the divorce this time. I may have had my share of bad moments, but I can't be with someone who gets drunk and resorts to violence, and now you've even injured me like this. I'm going to report you to the police. My eyes widened, but more than that, my parents looked freaked out. Wait a minute, Elliot. Certainly, it was wrong for our daughter to be violent, but isn't this a matter between a husband and wife? Let's handle this privately. No, even if we're in the middle of divorce negotiations, I can't stay silent after all this. I'll involve the appropriate authorities in this matter, Elliot said. With Elliot's words, an even heavier atmosphere filled the room. Elliot's colleague didn't intervene, and the woman stopped crying suddenly, so it became completely silent in the hospital room. I wonder how long the silence lasted. The heavy atmosphere was broken when both the woman and I started laughing at the same time. We held it in for a long time, but once we started laughing, there was nothing that the woman or I could do to stop it. Our small chuckle gradually turned into bursting into laughter. The reason why the woman and I were looking down wasn't because we couldn't bear the bad atmosphere, but because we were simply holding back our laughter while our shoulders were shaking from it. I told Elliot, who didn't seem to understand the situation at all. Police? Are you seriously saying that? Please, go ahead and turn me in. When I said that, I burst into laughter again, finding it funny. My parents were looking at me as if I had finally gone mad, with a puzzled expression. Seriously, this is hilarious. Is this a comedy? The woman was laughing hysterically, as if she agrees with me. Elliot was even more bewildered than the others, alternately looking at me and the woman, his expression becoming more and more stunned. Why are you laughing? First of all, you don't know each other, right? Elliot, who was turning pale, asked, and I told him the truth. We don't know each other? Serena and I? Actually, we know each other quite well. What? Now Elliot was completely pale. Just as I said. Serena, your lover, is a friend of mine. Well, we became friends only these past few months, though. Upon hearing the word lover, my parents and Elliot's male colleague all shifted their gazes to Elliot at once. To explain to everyone, I recounted the history between Serena and me. It all started a few months ago when you brought up the divorce. Since I wasn't convinced with the reason you gave me, I thought you were suspicious. Plus, I felt betrayed, so I hired a detective to investigate. That's how I found out about your relationship with Serena. Even though you said that you wanted to divorce me because we couldn't have a baby, you just wanted to remarry Serena in reality. Once I figured that out, I refused the divorce to buy more time. In the midst of all that, I decided to confront Serena and say a few things to her. When I said that much, Serena started talking. I was genuinely surprised when I met Raya, because I had no idea that Elliot was married. He always told me that he was single. Once I explained that to her, Raya understood too. Elliot couldn't say anything anymore. That's why we decided to join forces as victims of your actions. The reason why I kept rejecting the divorce was because I expected Elliot to lose his patience at some point and resort to some rough actions. On the other hand, Serena also continued to pressure Elliot into marriage, thinking that this would put Elliot in a bind and make him rush to finalize the divorce with me. When the time was right, I asked Serena to pretend to have noticed that Elliot was married and press even harder for a divorce with me and a remarriage with her, telling him that if he doesn't take an action quickly, she would break up with Elliot. If she does that, Elliot would be left with no choice. He was the one who was having an affair and he couldn't bring up a divorce. After thinking about what to do, Elliot made a proposal to Serena. And this was his plan. I'll handle it well, so I want you to play along. That's what Elliot said, apparently. I heard everything from Serena about the plan. It was quite a challenge to go along with that act. You knew that I didn't drink, so you gradually mixed a bit of alcohol into the food, right? You didn't mix well, and I could taste the alcohol in the food, so it was tough to keep eating while pretending not to notice. I said while laughing, and Elliot was in a panic. Even after I woke up, I was struggling to hold back my laughter at the sight of you. It must have been hard for you to put that many scratches on yourself. And to say you'd hand me over to the police. Even if I hadn't known about this plan, your lie would have been exposed as soon as the police did a full-scale investigation. Only Serena and I know the truth behind this incident. My parents and Elliot's male colleague were simply dumbfounded by my story. You thought of using my parents and your colleague as witnesses as well, but unfortunately for you, that didn't work out, did it? Were you planning to get some kind of settlement money from my parents? That won't happen. I continued. At this point, Elliot seemed to have become defiant and said, So, do you have evidence? Both Serena and I sighed in response to his words. While pointing at her phone, Serena said, I was filming you the whole time when you were making the wounds on yourself. You can't make any excuses or get away with this. Upon hearing that, Elliot collapsed. To him, I added, So, what are you going to do? Hand me over to the police? You can't do that, can you? Technically, I could report you to the police, but I'll cut you some slack, and as you wish, I'll agree to the divorce. However, in exchange, Serena and I will demand compensation. At this point, no one felt any sympathy for Elliot. After that, the divorce with Elliot was successfully finalized. Both Serena and I demanded substantial amounts of compensation. In my case, I was almost framed as the perpetrator, so I filed a civil suit as well. As for this case, the video that Serena had recorded was properly admitted as evidence, and we were able to easily win the case. Furthermore, having a colleague at the hospital as a witness became a double-edged sword, and people started talking about it at work. It was not hard to imagine that he wasn't respected anymore, and lost his position and everything at work. With this, Elliot has lost everything, such as his wife, his lover, his social status, and even the money to support himself. This was exactly what both Serena and I, who were betrayed by him, wanted. Through this, Serena and I became best friends. Nowadays, we go out together, even to matchmaking parties. You never know where you might form connections, but as fellow victims of the same man, we want to continue to have a good relationship.